I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped onto my back patio and saw the empty space where my brand new teak chairs should have been sitting. 4 of them, solid wood, expensive as hell, and not even a month old. I had saved up for 6 months to buy that outdoor furniture set, and now they were just gone. Vanished like they had never existed at all. My name is Oliver Preston, and I live in Meadowbrook Springs, a planned community just outside Phoenix, Arizona. The neighborhood is nice enough, with cookie-cutter houses painted in various shades of beige and tan, manicured lawns that require way too much water for the desert climate, and an HOA that makes the IRS look relaxed. I had moved here 2 years ago for work, transferring from Seattle to take a software engineering position at a tech startup downtown. The house was affordable, the commute was reasonable, and I figured I could deal with some HOA rules about lawn height and acceptable paint colors. What I had not anticipated was Brenda Morrison. Brenda was the HOA president, a position she had held for 7 consecutive years, according to my neighbors. She was 52 years old with short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive soccer mom cut. Always wore athleisure, where despite never actually exercising, and had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single rule in our HOA covenant was followed to the letter. She had fined me 3 times in the past year alone. Once for leaving my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, once for having a garden hose that was the wrong shade of green, and once for parking my car in my own driveway at an angle she deemed unsightly. Standing there on my patio, staring at the 4 circular dirt marks where my chairs had been, I felt my blood pressure rising. I had checked the HOA rules extensively before buying that furniture. Teak was approved. The design was approved. The color was natural wood, which was on the acceptable list. There was absolutely no reason those chairs should have been removed. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA hotline, a number I unfortunately had memorized by this point. It rang 4 times before Brenda's nasally voice answered. Meadowbrook Springs HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Brenda, this is Oliver Preston from 4782 Desert Bloom Lane. Someone took my patio chairs, 4 teak chairs that were on my back patio. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause, and I could practically hear her self-satisfied smile through the phone. Oh yes, Mr. Preston. I had those removed this morning. You what? Those chairs cost me $2,000. You cannot just take people's property. Actually, Mr. Preston, if you would refer to Section 12, subsection C of the HOA covenant, you would see that any outdoor furniture must be removed from site when not in use. Your chairs were visible from the Henderson's 2nd-story window, which constitutes a violation. I left a notice on your front door. I walked through my house to the front door and yanked it open. Sure enough, there was a yellow slip of paper tucked into the door frame. I grabbed it and read through Brenda's flowery handwriting explaining the supposed violation. Brenda, my chairs were on my back patio, behind a 6-foot privacy fence. The only way anyone could see them is if they were specifically looking into my yard from a 2nd-story window. That cannot possibly be what that rule means. The rule is quite clear, Mr. Preston. I have stored your chairs in the HOA storage facility. You may retrieve them once you have submitted a corrective action plan detailing how you intend to store them properly in the future. There is also a $200 removal and storage fee. $200. You stole my property, and now you want to charge me to get it back. I would appreciate it if you would not use inflammatory language, Mr. Preston. I enforced a community rule that you agreed to follow when you purchased your home. The fee covers the labor of removing the items and the storage space they are now occupying. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. Where is this storage facility? The HOA does not disclose the location of the storage facility to residents. This is to prevent unauthorized access. You may submit your retrieval request through the proper channels, and we will arrange a time for pickup. This is insane. I want my chairs back today. I am afraid that is not possible. The Corrective Action Committee meets every other Thursday. Today is Tuesday. The next meeting is in 9 days. Your request will be reviewed at that time. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Preston. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, absolutely furious. This was beyond petty HOA enforcement. This was theft. I considered calling the police right then, but I knew how those calls usually went. HOA disputes were civil matters, and cops in Phoenix had better things to do than referee neighborhood squabbles. I decided to walk around the neighborhood to cool off and figure out my next move. It was late afternoon in early June, and the temperature was already pushing 105 degrees. The heat shimmered off the asphalt as I walked past identical houses with identical drought-resistant landscaping. A few neighbors were outside, watering their approved desert plants during the designated watering hours. I had made it about 3 blocks from my house when I heard it. Music. Laughter. The unmistakable sound of a pool party in full swing. I followed the noise and found myself standing across the street from 4523 Saguaro Vista Court, a house I recognized immediately. It was Brenda Morrison's house, a sprawling single-story ranch that was about twice the size of mine. Her property backed up to the community greenbelt, which meant extra privacy. The sounds were coming from her backyard. The front gate was open, probably for guests to come and go. I could see cars parked along the street, and through the side yard, I caught glimpses of people in swimsuits walking around. Music was blasting from somewhere in the backyard, loud enough that it definitely violated the community noise ordinance that Brenda herself had written and loved to enforce. I was about to walk away when I saw something through the gap in the side gate that made me stop cold. There, arranged in a neat semicircle around Brenda's pool, were 4 teak chairs. My 4 teak chairs. I would recognize them anywhere, because I had assembled them myself and had managed to strip one of the screws slightly on the back left chair. I could see that same chair from where I was standing, the distinctive scratch on the armrest where my screwdriver had slipped. The audacity of it hit me like a physical force. She had not stored my chairs in some HOA facility. She had taken them for herself. She had stolen my property and was actively using it at her own pool party, probably bragging to her friends about her nice new furniture. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. I got shots of the chairs from multiple angles, zoomed in on the stripped screw and the scratch, documented everything I could see from the street. Then I pulled up the Phoenix Police non-emergency number and made the call. Phoenix Police Department, how can I help you? I would like to report a theft. I have located my stolen property at the thief's residence, and I can provide photo evidence. The dispatcher took down my information and told me an officer would be by shortly. I walked back to my house, which was only a few blocks away, and gathered my documentation. I had the receipt for the chairs, showing the purchase date and price. I had photos of them on my patio from when I first assembled them. I had Brenda's own notice admitting that she had taken them. By the time the doorbell rang 20 minutes later, I had built a pretty solid case. The officer at my door was a woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read Martinez. Mr. Preston, I am Officer Martinez. You called about stolen property. I invited her in and laid out everything on my dining room table. I showed her the receipt, the photos from my patio, the HOA notice, and the current photos of my chairs at Brenda's house. Officer Martinez examined everything carefully, taking notes. So the HOA president claimed she was storing these for a violation, but they are actually at her personal residence. Exactly. She told me they were in an HOA storage facility and that I would need to go through a formal process to get them back. She was planning to charge me $200. Meanwhile, she is using them at her pool party right now. That does appear to be theft by deception, Officer Martinez said. The value is over $1,000, which makes it a felony in Arizona. Do you want to press charges? Absolutely. All right, let me make a call and get another unit. We will head over there now. Officer Martinez went back to her patrol car while I waited on my front porch. The sun was starting to sink lower, but the heat was not letting up. Within 10 minutes, another patrol car pulled up, and Officer Martinez got out with a male officer who looked like he was in his 20s. Mr. Preston, this is Officer Chen. We are going to go speak with Miss Morrison now. Would you like to come with us to identify your property? I definitely wanted to come. We walked the 3 blocks together, and I could still hear the party going strong. Officer Martinez knocked firmly on the front door, but the music was too loud for anyone to hear. She tried the side gate, found it unlocked, and we entered the backyard. The party was in full swing. About 20 people were scattered around a large kidney-shaped pool, some swimming, others lounging on deck chairs, all holding drinks. A folding table near the back door held enough food for a small army. And there, arranged in prime position near the deep end, were my 4 teak chairs, occupied by 4 women who looked like they were part of Brenda's social circle. Brenda herself was standing near the grill, wearing a flowing white cover-up and oversized sunglasses, holding court with a group of guests. She looked up when she noticed the police officers, and her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance in about half a second. "Can I help you?" she called out, not bothering to turn down the music. Officer Martinez walked closer and I followed. The party guests were starting to notice now, conversations dying down as people turned to watch. Officer Chen moved to turn down the music. "Are you Brenda Morrison?" Officer Martinez asked. "I am. What is this about? I am in the middle of hosting an event." "Miss Morrison, we are responding to a theft report. Mr. Preston here claims that those 4 teak chairs belong to him and that you removed them from his property without permission." Brenda looked at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She removed her sunglasses and put on what I am sure she thought was a charming smile. "Officer, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I am the president of the Meadowbrook Springs HOA. Mr. Preston was in violation of our community rules, and I removed the offending items as is my authority under the covenant. This is a civil HOA matter, not a criminal issue." "You have the authority to take residents' personal property?" Officer Martinez asked. "I have the authority to enforce violations and remove items that are not in compliance." "And where did you say you stored these items?" Brenda hesitated for just a moment. "In the HOA storage facility." "That is interesting, because these chairs appear to be at your personal residence. In fact, they appear to be in active use at your pool party." The party had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching. I could see some of the guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. "I brought them here temporarily while I arranged for proper storage," Brenda said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Officer Martinez looked at me. "Mr. Preston, can you positively identify these as your chairs?" I walked over to the back left chair, where one of Brenda's friends was sitting looking extremely uncomfortable. "Would you mind standing up?" I asked. The woman practically leaped out of the chair. I pointed to the stripped screw on the back. "I stripped this screw when I assembled the chair 3 weeks ago. It is a Phillips head screw, and you can see where my screwdriver slipped and scratched the wood here." I showed the scratch I had documented in my photos. "These are absolutely my chairs. I have receipts and photographic evidence showing them on my patio." Officer Martinez turned back to Brenda. "Miss Morrison, did you inform Mr. Preston that these chairs were at your personal residence?" I told him they were in storage. "You specifically told him they were in an HOA storage facility and that he could not access them without going through a formal review process. You also intended to charge him a $200 fee to retrieve his own property. Is that correct?" Brenda's face was turning red. "That is standard procedure for violations. But these are not in HOA storage. They are at your house. You are using them. That constitutes theft by deception under Arizona law. This is absolutely ridiculous. I am enforcing community standards. You cannot arrest me for doing my job." "Madam, even HOA officials do not have the right to take personal property for their own use. That is theft. The value of these chairs exceeds $1,000, which makes this a Class 6 felony in Arizona." The guests were starting to grab their things. I could see people quietly collecting their towels and drinks, clearly wanting to get away from the situation. Brenda looked around at her fleeing party guests, and her expression turned venomous. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "You have always been a problem resident. You park wrong, your hose was the wrong color, you do not respect the community standards we have worked so hard to maintain. You stole my chairs," I said flatly. "You took them from my property, lied about where they were, and used them for yourself. That is not enforcing community standards. That is just theft. Miss Morrison, I am going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back," Officer Martinez said, pulling out her handcuffs. "You cannot be serious. Do you know who I am? I am on the City Council Liaison Committee. I have friends in the mayor's office." "Madam, please turn around." Brenda looked like she was going to argue further, but Officer Chen had moved to her other side, and she seemed to realize she was out of options. She turned around and Officer Martinez cuffed her, reciting her rights as she did so. The remaining party guests were leaving quickly now, nobody wanting to be associated with what was happening. I helped Officer Chen load my chairs into the back of my pickup truck, which I had Officer Martinez's permission to go retrieve while they were processing Brenda. By the time I got back, Brenda was in the back of a patrol car, still protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen. Officer Martinez handed me a case number and told me I would need to come to the station to make a formal statement. I agreed and thanked her for responding so quickly. As the patrol cars drove away with Brenda in the back of one, I stood in her driveway and took a deep breath. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I was not still so angry. I loaded the last chair into my truck and drove back to my house. My hands were shaking slightly as I unloaded them and set them back up on my patio. I took photos documenting their return, just in case I needed more evidence later. Then I went inside, opened a beer, and sat down to process what had just happened. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with text messages. Apparently, word had spread through the neighborhood quickly. I had messages from neighbors I barely knew, some expressing support, others asking what had happened, and a few from Brenda's friends who seemed to think I had overreacted. One message in particular stood out. It was from Tom Henderson, whose wife's second-story window had apparently been the one with the offensive view of my chairs. "Heard what happened. For what it is worth, Karen and I never complained about your chairs. We could not even see them unless we were really looking. Brenda has been out of control for a while now. Good for you for standing up to her. I spent the morning following up with the police station, going in to make my formal statement. The detective assigned to the case was a tired-looking man in his 50s named Detective Warren. He reviewed all my evidence and seemed satisfied that I had a strong case. We have been getting complaints about HOA abuses for years, he told me. Most of them are civil matters that we cannot do much about, but when someone crosses the line into actual theft, we can act. Your documentation is excellent. The fact that you have the receipt, photos showing the distinctive damage you caused during assembly, and her own written admission that she took the property makes this pretty straightforward. What happens now? I asked. She was arraigned this morning. She posted bail. There will be a preliminary hearing in a few weeks, and then potentially a trial. Given the evidence, I would not be surprised if her attorney advises her to take a plea deal. Felony theft is serious, especially for someone with no prior record who has something to lose like her reputation. Is there anything else I need to do? Just be available to testify if it goes to trial. Keep all your documentation. Do not talk to her or her representatives directly. If anyone from the HOA tries to retaliate, document it and let us know immediately. I left the station feeling more settled. At least the legal process was moving forward. I grabbed lunch at a local restaurant and then headed home. When I pulled onto my street, I noticed something immediately. There was a car parked in front of my house, a silver Mercedes that I did not recognize. As I got closer, I saw a man in a suit standing on my front porch. I parked in my driveway and got out cautiously. The man walked over, extending his hand. He was probably in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive-looking suit. "Mr. Preston, my name is Richard Sullivan. I am an attorney representing the Meadowbrook Springs HOA board. Do you have a few minutes to talk? That depends on what you want to talk about." I understand there was an incident yesterday involving HOA President Brenda Morrison. I have been retained by the remaining board members to handle the situation. Could we speak inside? I considered telling him to leave, but I was curious about what the board had to say. I led him into my living room and we sat down. Sullivan pulled out a folder. "Mr. Preston, let me start by saying that the HOA board was horrified to learn about what happened. Miss Morrison was acting entirely outside her authority, and her actions do not reflect the values or procedures of this community. She has been HOA president for 7 years. Are you telling me nobody noticed she was out of control before this?" Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Morrison has always been zealous in her enforcement of community standards. However, until yesterday, there was never any indication that she was taking property for her personal use. That crosses a serious line. What does the board want? As of this morning, Miss Morrison has been removed from her position as HOA president. The vice president, Martin Chen, has assumed her duties. The board has also voted to return your $200 fine that Miss Morrison attempted to impose. Additionally, we would like to offer you a formal apology and a waiver of your HOA dues for the next year as compensation for what you have been put through. That is a start, but it does not undo what she did. Of course not. The board fully supports the criminal case against Miss Morrison. We will cooperate with law enforcement as needed. I am here today to make sure you understand that the HOA as an entity is separate from Miss Morrison's actions. What about all the other violations she has issued? I got fined 3 times in the past year alone for ridiculous things. How many other residents got the same treatment? Sullivan sighed. The board is conducting a comprehensive review of all violations issued during Miss Morrison's tenure. Where violations appear to have been improperly issued or overly harsh, we will be issuing refunds and corrections. We are also revising our enforcement procedures to prevent this kind of abuse going forward. I want that in writing, all of it. The apology, the dues waiver, the commitment to review past violations, and the policy changes. I can have that drafted and to you by tomorrow. Then we can talk once I have had a chance to review it with my own attorney. Sullivan nodded and stood up. That is completely reasonable. I will have the documents sent over. Again, Mr. Preston, the board deeply regrets what happened. We are committed to making this right. After he left, I called a lawyer I knew through work, explaining the situation. She agreed to review whatever the HOA sent over and to represent me in any follow-up matters. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching Arizona HOA law, trying to understand exactly what had happened and what my rights were. The more I read, the angrier I got. HOAs in Arizona had significant power, but that power was supposed to be checked by due process requirements and legal limitations. Brenda had violated multiple statutes. She had deprived me of my property without notice and an opportunity to be heard. She had converted the property for her personal use. She had charged improper fees. Any one of those could have been grounds for a lawsuit even without the criminal theft charges. The following week was a blur of activity. The HOA's written apology and settlement offer arrived as promised. My attorney reviewed it and negotiated a few additional terms, including an agreement that the HOA would pay my legal fees. I signed the revised agreement, getting back my $200 plus a year of waived dues, which amounted to about $1,800 total. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. I learned from various sources that Brenda had not only taken my chairs, but had apparently confiscated items from multiple residents over the years. Some people had just accepted it, figuring it was easier than fighting the HOA. Others had retrieved their items and paid the fees, not realizing they had options. Now that everything had come to light, more residents were coming forward with their own stories. Martin Chen, the new HOA president, held an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse. I attended, along with what looked like half the neighborhood. Martin was a soft-spoken engineer in his 60s who had been on the board for several years, but had largely deferred to Brenda's aggressive leadership. I want to start by apologizing to everyone here, Martin began, standing at the front of the room with a microphone. The board failed in our oversight duties. We allowed Miss Morrison to abuse her authority, and many of you suffered because of it. We are committed to doing better. A hand shot up in the crowd. It was a woman I recognized from a few streets over. Brenda confiscated my garden gnome last year. She said it was not on the approved decorations list. She charged me $50 to get it back. Can I get a refund? Yes, Martin said. We are reviewing all confiscations and fines from the past 3 years. If you believe you were improperly charged, please submit a complaint form to the HOA office. We have hired a neutral third-party mediator to review all cases and make recommendations. Refunds will be issued where appropriate. More hands went up. For the next hour, Martin fielded questions and complaints, taking notes and promising action. I could see the stress on his face. He had inherited a mess, and cleaning it up was not going to be easy or quick. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for taking a stand. One older man shook my hand vigorously. I got fined $300 last year for having the wrong style of mailbox. She said mine was not approved, even though it was the same mailbox that came with the house when I bought it 15 years ago. I paid the fine because I did not know what else to do. Thank you for fighting back." The preliminary hearing for Brenda's criminal case was set for mid-July. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Springs slowly started to return to normal, or at least a new version of normal. The new HOA board was making visible efforts to be more reasonable. They published a simplified version of the covenant rules, removing some of the more absurd restrictions. They established a formal appeals process for violations. They even started a monthly newsletter to keep residents informed. I settled back into my routine, working from home most days and enjoying my patio furniture without fear of it being stolen. The temperature was brutal, hitting 115 degrees on some afternoons, but my back patio had good shade in the evening, and I could sit out there once the sun started going down. One evening in early July, about 3 weeks after the incident, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman I did not recognize standing there. She was probably in her late 40s with dark hair and a nervous expression. "Mr. Preston, my name is Nicole Morrison. I am Brenda's sister." I must have looked surprised because she quickly held up her hands. "I am not here to make excuses for her or ask you to drop charges or anything like that. I actually wanted to thank you." "Thank me? Can I explain? It will just take a minute." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not inviting her in but willing to hear her out on the porch. Nicole took a deep breath. Brenda has always been controlling. Even when we were kids, she had to run everything, had to be in charge. But over the past few years, it has gotten so much worse. I think the HOA presidency fed into her worst instincts. She had power over people and she loved it. Our family has been trying to get her to see a therapist for years, but she always refused. "I am sorry about your family situation, but I am not sure what this has to do with me." When she got arrested, it was like something broke. She could not deny what she had done anymore. She could not blame everyone else or claim she was just enforcing rules. She had to face the reality that she had stolen from you, and that started to crack through her defenses. Is she doing better? She is getting help. Real help. She is seeing a therapist 3 times a week, and she is on medication for anxiety and some other issues. She is still facing the criminal charges, and she knows she will have to deal with the consequences. But for the first time in years, she is not pretending everything is fine and everyone else is wrong. That is good for her, I guess, but it does not change what she did. I know. And she knows that too, which is part of her progress. I just wanted you to hear it from someone who knows her. What happened was not okay, but maybe something good can come from it if it means she finally gets the help she needed. Nicole left shortly after, and I stood on my porch thinking about what she had said. I did not feel particularly sympathetic toward Brenda, but I could acknowledge that people were complicated. Maybe she did have underlying issues that contributed to her behavior. That did not excuse what she did, but it added context. The preliminary hearing arrived on a sweltering July morning. I dressed in business casual and drove to the courthouse downtown, finding parking in a structure that cost $20 for the first hour. The courthouse was a modern building with heavy security. I went through metal detectors and found the correct courtroom on the 3rd floor. Detective Warren was already there, along with Officer Martinez. They greeted me and explained what to expect. This is just a preliminary hearing to determine if there is enough evidence to proceed to trial. Given the strength of the evidence, it should be straightforward. Brenda arrived with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s. Brenda looked different than I remembered. She had lost weight, and there was a tiredness to her face that had not been there before. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. The hearing was surprisingly quick. The prosecutor presented the evidence, including my photos, receipts, and testimony. Brenda's attorney did not contest the facts but argued that there were mitigating circumstances and that her client had no prior record. The judge, an older woman with graying hair and reading glasses, reviewed everything and quickly determined that there was sufficient evidence to proceed. "The defendant is bound over for trial," the judge said. "However, I am going to order a recess for plea negotiations. Based on what I have seen here, I think it is in everyone's interest to explore a resolution without going to trial." Brenda's attorney requested a sidebar with the prosecutor. I watched as they spoke in hushed tones for several minutes. Detective Warren leaned over to me. "They are probably working out a plea deal. First offense, otherwise clean record. She will likely get probation and restitution if she pleads guilty." After about 10 minutes, the attorneys returned. Brenda's attorney addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client would like to enter a plea at this time if the state is amenable." The prosecutor nodded. "The state has agreed to a plea arrangement. Miss Morrison will plead guilty to theft of property valued between $1,000 and $2,000, a Class 6 felony. We are recommending a sentence of supervised probation for 2 years, 100 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and full restitution to the victim including any associated costs." The judge looked at Brenda. "Miss Morrison, do you understand the plea agreement being offered?" Brenda stood up, her voice shaky. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you wish to plead guilty to felony theft?" There was a long pause. I could see Brenda struggling with it, the reality of admitting guilt in a court of law. Finally, she spoke. "Yes, Your Honor, I plead guilty." The judge accepted the plea and ordered a pre-sentencing investigation. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. As the hearing concluded, Brenda walked past me without making eye contact. Her attorney stopped briefly to shake my hand. "Thank you for being reasonable about this," she said. "My client knows what she did was wrong, and she is taking steps to address the underlying issues." I nodded but did not say much. I was ready to be done with the whole thing. Sentencing came in late August. The judge sentenced Brenda to exactly what the plea deal specified: 2 years of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory weekly counseling sessions, and she was ordered to pay me $2,300 in restitution to cover the cost of the chairs plus my time and expenses related to the case. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, even if it had taken months and a lot of stress to get there. Brenda would have a felony conviction on her record, which would impact her life in various ways. She would never be HOA president again, and hopefully, she would get the help she needed to address whatever issues had driven her behavior. Life in Meadowbrook Springs continued to improve under the new HOA leadership. Martin Chen proved to be a fair and reasonable president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. The board used some of the HOA reserve funds to renovate the community park and resurface the tennis courts. They organized neighborhood events that actually brought people together rather than dividing them. I got to know my neighbors better, bonding over our shared experiences with Brenda's reign of terror. It turned out that a lot of people had stories, but nobody had felt empowered to fight back until they saw that it was possible. Several residents who had been fined unfairly got refunds, sometimes significant amounts. The HOA even fired the management company that had been enabling Brenda's behavior and hired a new company with better oversight procedures. My patio furniture remained on my patio, unmolested, throughout the summer and into the fall. I spent many evenings sitting in those chairs, reading or just enjoying the cooler desert air as the brutal summer heat finally broke. Every time I sat down, I thought about the principle involved. It had not been about the chairs themselves, not really. It had been about standing up to someone who abused their power, who thought rules applied to everyone except themselves. In October, I received a check in the mail from Brenda Morrison for $2,300. It came with a handwritten note on plain stationery. Mr. Preston, I am deeply sorry for what I did. I let my need for control override my judgment and my ethics. I have no excuse. I am working on myself and hope to be a better person. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Brenda Morrison. I deposited the check and filed the note away. I did not respond. Some things did not require a response. In November, the weather finally turned pleasant in Phoenix, dropping into the 70s during the day. I hosted a small gathering on my patio, inviting some of my neighbors over for drinks and appetizers. Tom and Karen Henderson came, along with several other people from the street. We sat in my teak chairs, ate good food, and talked about normal things. Nobody mentioned Brenda or the HOA drama. We had all moved past it. As the sun set that evening, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, I looked around at my neighbors enjoying themselves in my backyard. This was what community was supposed to be about. People getting along, respecting each other, helping each other out. Not rules and fines and power trips. The following spring, I attended the annual HOA meeting where board elections were held. Martin Chen was running for re-election as president, and he won unanimously. He gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support and outlining his goals for the coming year. It was boring and procedural and absolutely perfect. After the meeting, Martin pulled me aside. I wanted to thank you again for what you did last year. It could not have been easy, but you did the right thing. You forced us all to look at what we had become and make changes. This is a better community because you stood your ground. I just wanted my chairs back, I said with a slight smile. It was never about the chairs, Martin replied. It was about principle, and that matters. He was right. It had been about principle, about not letting someone take advantage of you just because they had a title and a rule book, about standing up even when it would have been easier to just let it go and pay the fee and move on. Those kinds of stands mattered, even in small ways, even in suburban neighborhoods in Arizona where the stakes were outdoor furniture rather than anything life-changing. I lived in Meadowbrook Springs for 3 more years after that. The HOA remained reasonable under Martin's leadership and eventually under his successor when he retired. I never had another major conflict with the board. I paid my dues, followed the sensible rules, and enjoyed my home. When I finally moved in the spring of 2029, accepting a job offer in Denver that was too good to pass up, I sold my house to a young couple moving from California. During the home inspection, we sat on my back patio in those teak chairs, and they asked about the neighborhood. The HOA here is pretty good, I told them honestly. They are fair, reasonable, and they care about the community. It was not always that way, but they learned some hard lessons and made real changes. That is good to hear, the husband said. We were worried about HOA horror stories. Everyone has one. I have one too, I said, but it ended the right way. Sometimes standing up for yourself makes all the difference. I did not tell them the whole story. It did not seem necessary. They would have their own experiences with the HOA, hopefully all positive. They did not need to know about Brenda Morrison or the police or the court case. That was history now, a chapter that had closed. On my last day in the house, I did a final walk through, checking that everything was clean and ready for the new owners. I stepped onto the back patio one last time and looked at those 4 teak chairs, arranged around the table where I had spent so many evenings. They had weathered beautifully, the wood aging to a soft silver gray. The stripped screw was still visible if you looked closely, a reminder of where this had all started. I had considered taking the chairs with me to Denver. They were mine, after all, and they held significance. But in the end, I left them as part of the sale. The new owners had admired them, and they belonged here now, on this patio in this house. They were just chairs, after all. The principle they represented, the stand I had taken, that came with me. That was what mattered. As I drove away from Meadowbrook Springs that sunny May morning, heading north toward a new job and a new city and a new chapter of my life, I felt a sense of peace. I had learned something important during my time there. I had learned that ordinary people have more power than they think. That abuses of authority can be challenged and stopped. That doing the right thing, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable, creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate situation. Brenda Morrison completed her probation successfully, according to a mutual acquaintance who still lived in the neighborhood. She moved to Tucson to be closer to her sister and started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped low-income residents fight unfair housing practices. The irony was not lost on anyone, but if she found redemption in using her energy to help people rather than control them, that seemed like a positive outcome. The Meadowbrook Springs HOA continued to function smoothly, focusing on maintaining property values and community standards without the petty tyranny that had characterized Brenda's tenure. Violations were handled with warnings and reasonable timelines for compliance. Fines were reserved for serious or repeated issues. The community thrived under a system that balanced rules with common sense and treated residents with respect. And somewhere in a backyard in Phoenix, 4 teak chairs sat on a patio, weathering in the desert sun. They were just chairs. But they were also a reminder that sometimes the smallest stands produce the biggest changes. That fighting back against petty injustice matters. That you do not have to accept being pushed around, even by someone with official authority. I carried those lessons with me to Denver and beyond. Whenever I encountered situations where someone abused their power or tried to take advantage, I remembered the afternoon I found my stolen chairs at a pool party and made the decision to call the police. I remembered standing my ground, documenting everything, following through with the legal process even when it would have been easier to just let it go. Those chairs taught me that principle matters, that your possessions and your rights are worth defending. That communities improve when people refuse to tolerate bad behavior from those in charge. And that sometimes justice prevails if you are willing to fight for it. Years later, when friends or colleagues would share their own HOA horror stories, I would tell them about the time my HOA president stole my patio furniture and used it at her pool party. I would describe finding my chairs at her house, calling the police, watching her get arrested in front of all her party guests. I would explain how that one act of standing up led to systemic changes in an entire community, helped other residents get refunds for unfair fines, and ultimately resulted in better governance for hundreds of families. And I would always end the story the same way. It was never really about the chairs. It was about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. Because if you let people get away with the small abuses, they will keep pushing until the abuses are not small anymore. Someone has to be willing to stand up and say no. Sometimes that someone has to be you. The story resonated with people because everyone has dealt with petty authority figures at some point. Everyone has felt powerless in the face of rules that seem designed to harass rather than help. Everyone has wondered whether fighting back is worth the effort. My story provided an answer. Yes, it is worth it. Not just for yourself, but for everyone else who comes after you. I never regretted calling the police that day. I never regretted pressing charges or seeing it through to the end. The time and stress and energy were worth it because the outcome was just. Brenda faced consequences for her actions. The HOA was forced to reform. The community became a better place to live. And I learned that I had the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to back down. Those 4 teak chairs, wherever they are now, represent more than outdoor furniture. They represent the principle that your property rights matter, that abuses of authority should not be tolerated, and that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to be victims. They represent a moment when I chose action over acceptance, justice over convenience, principle over peace. And that choice echoed forward through time, changing not just my own life but the lives of everyone in that community. It proved that one person standing up can shift the entire dynamic, can expose corruption, can force change. It demonstrated that the system, for all its flaws, can still work if you are willing to use it properly. So when people ask me if it was worth it, if going through the police reports and court appearances and stress was really necessary over some patio chairs, I always say yes. Because it was never about the chairs. It was about refusing to let someone steal from me and get away with it. It was about holding someone accountable who thought they were above accountability. It was about making my community better for everyone. That is always worth fighting for.